Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens. It's day 11 of 25 days of Christmas comics. And I'm your host, the Dude Without Fear. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're a first time viewer, I appreciate you checking out the channel. If you like this content, be sure to give me that thumbs up and subscribe because there's more content like this on its way. So as you probably know from clicking on this video, our story tonight features the Punisher. And I really wanted to include the Punisher in 25 Days of Christmas comics because I really like the Punisher. And I know a lot of people out there love the Punisher. He's a very popular character. So in preparation for this, I've pretty much done nothing in my free time except read Christmas comics and make videos about them. So I've read, the Punisher has a lot of Christmas comics, and I've read most of them. And I was getting kind of discouraged because none of them that I had read I felt were good enough to make a video about. But then I came across one that was easily better than the other handful that I read. And so our story tonight comes from Punisher War Journal number 39, written by one of my favorite writers in the comic book world, one of the best writers in comic books, Chuck Dixon. And this is our second story in 25 Days of Comics, in 25 Days of Christmas Comics, to be titled Sleigh Ride. So our story starts out, Micro is fixing to decorate a Christmas tree in their hideout, and he's untangling some Christmas lights, and he's telling Frank that maybe Frank should think about getting out of there for the holidays. And Frank's like, "You think so, Micro?" Micro says, "Yeah. Since you've been sitting home letting your ribs mend, you've drunk all my beer, watched It's a Wonderful Life 16 times, and cleaned every gun in the place 3 times a day." And then you can hear It's a Wonderful Life playing on the TV. And Frank thinks, yeah, I might just do that. And Micro has fashioned a noose out of Christmas lights. And he says, "If you want to see Christmas morning, you'd better. You're making me nuts." So then the Punisher is on a bus, and he says, I book a flight to Montana and find a remote ski lodge that still has some vacancies. Just sitting around with Micro and the television for company was making me crazy too. I figure this is as far from the war as I can get. I'll be forced to relax. I'm not even wearing a piece. The Glock is locked away with the luggage. Christmas is for families, for kids, for friends. The last holiday I celebrated was when my family was alive. This time of year, I'd like to put the calendar on fast forward. And so behind Frank in the back of the bus, there's all these people that are like partying and stuff. And beside him is a woman with her young son. And all of a sudden, an avalanche hits the bus. And it knocks the bus off the road and down a cliffside and buries the bus in the snow. The woman that was sitting next to Frank on the bus is trying to wake him up. And she says, Mister. And he comes out of his sleep, and she's like, "Goodness, I thought you were dead." And Punisher says, just stunned, where are we? She says, we fell off the road. I think we're buried in the snow. And another passenger says, the driver's dead, man. Hit his head on the steering wheel. Blood everywhere. Whoa. And Frank gets in his face and he says, we have ladies and a child here. Keep it down. The guy says, okay, Chief, take a pill, all right? Another passenger says, what are we going to do, man? The woman finds another passenger who's slumped over in his seat, and she says, this man's dead too, but I don't see any injuries. And her son points out that he's got a medical bracelet just like his grandpa does. And Frank goes over to him and checks his pulse, and the woman says that his bracelet's probably for diabetes or maybe an allergy to a drug. Frank says he's way past that now. Not a mark on him. Heart attack, maybe. I'm moving him to the back. You two guys bring the driver and follow me. And they're freaking out because they don't want to touch a dead guy. And Frank's like, we're carrying the bodies to the back, out of the way. So get moving. Frank takes control of the situation. He's telling them that, it's going to start to get really cold. The snow that they're packed under will help hold in some of the heat. But that it's going to get really cold, and that they need to unpack what bags are on board so that they can get all the blankets and things that will help keep them warm out. He also tells them to get food and any liquids except for alcohol so that they can stay hydrated. And one of the guys is like, you like a Boy Scout or something? Frank gets in his face and says, yeah, stick around and I'll show you my merit badge. And he asks, did I see a radio earlier? And so the woman hands him a radio and says that she couldn't get much on it. And Frank says there might be something on the news about the avalanche, and so he's trying to dial in, and they come across a news broadcast, and it tells them that a cold front's moving in. And then it says that in other news, a manhunt continues for an escaped murderer from the Mountain State home for the criminally insane, and that more news will be coming at the top of the hour. So Frank says, we'll listen in then. Let's conserve the batteries for now. And one of the guys says, look at the bright side, girls. At least we're safe from that psycho. And one of them says, as far as we know anyway. And they kind of start to worry. They're like, the lodge probably thinks that we just turned back because of all the snow. And Frank's trying to keep everybody calm. He says, just huddle up and try to stay warm. I'm sure they'll have us out in the morning. So then Frank goes to check on the woman and the boy. And he says, is he all right? She says, he's scared, but so am I. And Frank says, you're doing all right. You're pretty cool in an emergency. Are you a nurse or a paramedic? Something like that. And she says, no, I'm a housewife. I've been through a pretty brutal divorce. I guess I'm still numb over that. Frank says, that bad, huh? And she says, aren't they all? I promised Jeffrey we'd have a quiet Christmas for once. Now look at us. Frank says, this will be a Christmas to remember. And she says if he ever has a chance to remember it. And Frank assures her, we'll be out of here in the morning. And then the lights go out. The battery died. And Frank tells everybody, just stay close. Try not to move around too much. And all of a sudden the light clicks on and the little boy has woken up. And he says, I've got a Baxter Bunny safety light. Can we use this? And Frank takes it from him with a smile and says, sure, but let's give Bunny a rest for now. We might need him later. So then everybody's kind of grouped up and cuddling. under blankets to try to stay warm. And the woman is sleeping on Frank's chest, and the boy's in Frank's lap. And Frank's just thinking to himself that his ribs are hurting again. They're keeping him awake. And they must have rebroken in the fall. And he thinks, it's been a long time since I've been this close to a family. The boy's breath is soft. The woman is warm against me. It brings back an old pain, one that hurts worse than the ribs. And then he falls asleep. And a scream wakes him up. And a girl's freaking out. And he's like, what's wrong, Cindy? And she says, oh, he's bleeding. And he checks this guy's pulse. And says he's dead. Somebody stabbed him to death. And then he asks to see everybody's hands. And one of the guys is like, what is this, man? He's like, somebody did your buddy in. Somebody on the bus. Everybody shows him their hands. And he uses the light to look at them. Says, all right, you're clean, but one of you could have just changed gloves. And the guy's like, talk about paranoid. And Frank grabs him by the shirt. Says, I'm on a bus under 50 feet of snow and somebody decides they want to start filleting people. Call me paranoid. Help me move your pal to the back of the bus. So as they're moving the guy onto this stack of dead bodies that they've got now, Punisher asks the guy how well he knows the girls he's traveling with. He says, I don't know them, man. Me and Randy picked them up in Billings on the way up here. And Frank says, that's where the state mental home is, right? And the guy says, but that escaped killer would be a guy, right? Frank says, radio didn't say, did it? And the guy's just like, whoa. So then the girls tell the guys, you two stay away from us. I know Aikido. Either one of you makes a move, I'll hurt you. And the guy goes and gets under his blanket and tells him to chill out, that he's not going to come near him. And they're like, just make sure you don't. So Frank asked to see the radio again, and one of the women says that we already tried it. Somebody took the batteries while we were asleep. And Frank tells the girls to stay together and that he's going to keep a watch on them. And they say, who's going to be watching you? Then he goes back to the woman and her child and asks if they still want him to sit with them. And she says that she does, that, you know, this is a crazy situation and it can be any of us, but she feels that she trusts Frank and she wants him to stay. And he tells her, you and Jeffrey just try to stay warm. I won't let anything happen to you. And she asks where he was going on the trip. Was he going to visit family? And he says, you could say that. And she said, I'm sorry, I'm being so nosy. I just wanted to talk. And Frank says, it's okay. I don't get to talk to people too much. And then all of a sudden, there's a sound of a struggle and a scream. And he tells him to stay there. And the girl that found the last dead guy found another dead guy. Her coat is covered in blood. And Frank says that she's the killer. He says it makes sense. She took the batteries out of her own radio. And the woman that trusts Frank says it can't be her. She says, look at her coat and her hands. She was cut defending herself. And Frank says, but the other two are dead and there's no weapon. But then he says, could one of the other two have been the psycho and she killed them in self-defense? And the woman points out that she's holding something in her hand, and she gets it out of the girl's hand, and it's the medical bracelet from the the second dead guy they found after the crash. And Frank takes it from her and tells her to take her son and the girl to the front of the bus. And she wants to know what the bracelet says, and he says, just do as I say. If anybody but me comes up from the rear of the bus, you do what you gotta do. So Frank takes off his sweater to reveal a bulletproof vest with the Punisher skull on it underneath, and he wraps his sweater around one of his arms. And he says the first rule in a knife fight is that you're going to get cut. Expect it, accept it. The trick is to get cut less than the other guy. A real good trick, since the other guy is the only one with a blade. So Frank's got the light, and he's trying to find the killer, and the killer's up in the luggage racks above the seats. And he jumps down onto Frank and stabs. Frank tries to stop it with the arm that's wrapped in the sweater, and he stabs through the sweater. We learn that the man is cataleptic. It's like epilepsy, except the seizures take the form of a death-like coma. So the comas last a few hours, and during that time the victim seems to have no pulse. Punisher punches him in the face, busts his nose, and this dude with holding a knife, licking the blood coming down off his nose. And Frank says he's got the strength only a real psychopath has. But this is probably the longest he's been off Thorazine or Xanax in years. God charges Frank. And Frank says he can feel the rebroken ribs stabbing his lungs. So Frank, on the ground in pain, feels like he's about to pass out, and he knows that if he passes out, he's dead. And that he can't die because he has to keep his promise that he made to the woman, because he said he wouldn't let anything happen to them. So he's laying on the ground, and he's reaching underneath the seats trying to find something to hit this guy with. And he feels something with a rubber grip. He says it's going to feel pretty stupid if this is a tennis racket. And he pulls it out, and it's a ski pole. And he jabs it through the guy's chest and kills him. And then the woman runs over to Frank, and she's concerned about his stabbed arm. He says, it's alright. I lost Jeffrey's flashlight. She says, it's okay. It's getting lighter out now. He says, sunlight. We can't be too far from the surface. I'm going to try to dig a tunnel out. He says his every move is agony, but if I wait and the sun melts the snow, we can slide further down the embankment. So he digs out a tunnel from the bus and gets the kid and the woman and the other girl out, and then the rescue team sees them as soon as they get out in the sunlight. And he tells Jeffrey just a little bit longer and he'll be safe and warm. Then he tells Jeffrey's mom that he'll be taken off as soon as they get them to the hospital. He says, you tell them one of the guys down there killed the psycho and then died of his wounds. And she tells Frank that it doesn't have to be that way. She says, you could stay with us. You don't have to run right away. And Frank says, that's not a good idea for a lot of reasons. And she says, I'll tell them your version on one condition, if you'll trust me enough to tell me your name. And he caves, and he says his name is Frank. And she tells him, Merry Christmas, Frank. And Frank thinks to himself, it turned out to be a working vacation. I'll take the long way home. It'll give me time to think up the lies I'm going to tell Micro about my relaxing holiday. So really good story about the Punisher trapped, weaponless, on a bus, and it's a good mystery whodunit. Who's knocking everybody off? Who's killing? Who's the killer? And it's just a really good story. And it's not, it's kind of like the Robin and the Joker story that I shared a few days ago, that shares the same name, Sleigh Ride. It's kind of like that story in that there's not really a Christmas moral to the story, and in all honesty, I don't know that there's actually a moral to this story. It's almost just pure entertainment. But in thinking about what transpired in the story, it's a good action story. It's a good mystery story. It would actually make a really good episode of a TV show if only there was a really excellent TV show about the Punisher. This would be a good episode of that. But in thinking about what stands out to me about this story, the thing that really stood out to me was that there's obviously this connection between Frank and the woman, and they remind him of his family that he lost, and is the whole reason that he fights this war against crime. And he mentions that he hasn't celebrated Christmas since he lost his family, and while he's not necessarily celebrating Christmas with these people, he's actually in a terrifying situation for them. He's not really freaking out. He's been in worse situations. He's confident that they'll make it through. But when she's sleeping on him and the boy's on him asleep, they he says that it brings back a pain that's much worse than his broken ribs. And at the end there, where they kind of share that moment and he tells her his name, when she tells him that he doesn't have to run, that he can stay with them, he says that's a bad idea for numerous reasons. And how I interpret that is that it's bad for her because of all the trouble that he would bring with him, and he's not somebody that she should get involved with because it's going to make her life way harder. And it's bad for him because even though he probably could have, that could develop into something and he could have a family once more, it would stop him from his mission. It would stop him from the war, and he doesn't want to do that. He wants to stay on his course, stay on his path. There was obviously this connection between them, that even though he just met her, he protected them as if they were his own family. And he made a promise to her that he would protect her and the boy, and he did everything he could to fulfill that promise. For a brief moment in time, Frank got to have a family again. It wasn't his family, and it wasn't a permanent thing, but just for that night, Frank had a family again. And I thought that was cool. That was a nice touch from Mr. Dixon. And while while there's not really a good moral of the story that stands out to me, I just really appreciate this story. It's a very good Punisher story. So if I were to apply a moral to the story, it would be to not let yourself be afraid to get close to people or for them to get close to you. Even though you may not have a family, doesn't mean that you can't have one. But in order to have one, you have to allow yourself that vulnerability to open up so that that connection can be made. You have to allow yourself to make a connection with somebody. So I guess that's if I had to apply a moral to it, that's what I would say. So that's all I've got for tonight. I appreciate you watching. Be sure to come back here tomorrow for day 12 of 25 Days of Christmas Comics. Thank you for watching. Good night. God bless.